Good evening. Welcome to Day 5 of the Toronto International Film Festival. My name is Tom Powers. I'm the documentary programmer of the festival. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community. This film is eligible for the Gross People's Choice Award and the Gross People's Choice Documentary Award. You can vote online. Go to tiff.net/vote. I want to thank the History Channel and A&E Networks for providing us with this film. You are the first audience at the festival to see Meeting Gorbachev. We are always delighted to have a new film by Werner Herzog. In this case, there are two filmmakers behind this, Werner Herzog and André Singer. Both of them have long histories making films. They've collaborated on 14 projects in the past. André Singer first when he was nearly 30 years ago, when he was a commissioning editor at the BBC, brought aboard Werner Herzog to do Lessons of Darkness, his extraordinary film shot on the Kuwaiti oil fields after the war. And they've gone on to make 14 projects together since then. Some of the films that Werner Herzog, some of the documentary films that Werner Herzog has had here recently include Into the Inferno, Into the Abyss, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, Encounters at the End of the World, many of those projects that André Singer was a part of. It's my great pleasure to bring to the stage both of them, André Singer and Werner Herzog. Over to you, sir.
You want me to speak?
Yes, André got me into this mess, so you have to speak first.
Well, first of all, it's fantastic to be here back in Toronto, where I've spent many a fascinating time in the past working for Alliance Atlantis. When I had the opportunity to make this film, commissioned by German television, I thought, who can make this more interesting? Who can make this sort of a much more personal, more fascinating film? Although it's, for me, a phenomenal privilege to meet and be working with one of the great statesmen of the 20th century, I still felt that it needed a touch that I couldn't give it. And of course, having worked over many years with Werner, I thought, here is a man who, as you will see later, has a vested interest in speaking to Mikhail Gorbachev and can bring something extra, something special to the program. And I think you'll find that I was very correct in my decision. And so Werner came on board, and the result you will see is very much a Werner Herzog film.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me back at the Toronto Film Festival. I have only pleasant experiences here. Thank you very much. And thank you, the audience, for having me yet again. I want to remind you that the film was made against all odds with Mikhail Gorbachev, who was very ill and is still quite ill and ailing. So every single time we filmed with him last October, last December, and in April this year, he was always delivered from hospital right in front of our cameras. And I wish him all the best. And I wish him health. And I wish that he will see the film very soon. We are trying to show it in Moscow to him, but we don't know exactly when we can do it. Maybe one thing about cultural etiquette that I should explain. Gorbachev and I took a liking in each other, and he literally, although we had only 2 meetings arranged, he literally summoned me back. He wanted me back one last time. That was in April. And you will see that we have, of course, a matter-of-fact relationship, but we truly like each other a lot, and I address him with his first name, Mikhail and Sergeyevich. Culturally, you have to understand that in Russia, the most formal way of addressing somebody who is not your buddy, it sounds a little bit as if he was my buddy when I say Mikhail Sergeyevich. It means Mikhail, son of Sergei. And that's the most formal way to address a head of state or somebody whom you show respect. So please understand that it's not a form of being his buddy when I address him like that. I think we'll be back here for a short Q&A.
Yes.
Please enjoy the film. We'll see you later. Okay, bye-bye.
André, when this project originated with you, what were you thinking you wanted to capture in a film about Gorbachev? Certainly, he's been covered in many different ways before. So what were you thinking what were you hoping the film would be?
Well, you say he's been covered in many films before, but I found, and I still find, that there's a certain enigma about the man, that I grew up during the Cold War. I witnessed it. I was a student and marched against the bomb. And
I'll just ask you to keep the microphone close.
I realized what a significant figure Gorbachev was, but I didn't really get to grips with him as an individual during that time. And then I found that my sons, I have 3 adult sons, and I talk about Gorbachev to them, and they know he was the last Soviet president, but they don't really know what happened. It's already history. And I think the significance of Gorbachev and what we very much wanted in the film was to realize that how relevant that era of politics was to today, and the lessons we can learn from a character like Gorbachev in today's world. And I think that if we could capture a little of that and humanize the politician of the 20th century, who to my mind was rather a great man, then I think we've achieved something significant. And I think that's what I hoped with Werner we could do.
I would like to mention something to capture the human being. I'm forever grateful to my colleague filmmaker Vitaly Mansky, who has a film here at this very festival about Vladimir Putin. And he allowed us to use a whole sequence from a film he shot in 2000 during Easter holidays in Russia. It's a sequence where he is back home and alone and checks out the empty empty house, and where he meets his aunt, who is blind, and greets him. So that is Vitaly Mansky, and I'm very, very grateful, because this really contributes to give a deep insight into the soul of the man. And so I would very much advise you to see his film.
It's called Putin's Witnesses. It has one more screening on Sunday, September 16th.
I saw it this afternoon, and I would advise you to see the film.
So, Werner, we see the rapport that you have with Gorbachev. I wonder how that rapport came. When you initially met him, do you think Gorbachev had seen any of your films before?
I do not know, and it doesn't matter. No, we had, I think it was clear to him. I said to him, I'm not a journalist. I don't have a piece of paper with me. I do not have a catalog of questions. So you're not speaking to a journalist. You've got to face a poet. And he looked at me and he said, okay. So, and he took a liking in me. It was practically after 5-10 minutes of conversation. And it was a free conversation that meandered. And of course, I tried to steer it a little bit into certain subjects. But it was really the way I would like to encounter somebody of his caliber. And the last time meeting him, when André brought the chocolate from London and when he recites a poem of Lermontov, was not planned originally. We were done after 2 sessions last October, last December, and he wanted to see me again. And again, he was delivered right out of hospital. He really made an effort. In some of the shots, you see him with a bandage around his hand. He was actually brought by an ambulance, and he was disconnected from his intravenous drip, and the hospital people covered it with a bandage so it would not be seen. The moment we shut down the camera, he went straight back in the ambulance to the hospital. So he really wanted to do this and do it again and a third time again. It took us by surprise because I didn't have a visa anymore, and it's a complicated sort of thing to get it so quickly. And until the night before I traveled, I didn't know whether I could make it because I had no visa. So
Werner Herzog doesn't need a visa.
yes, I do. Unfortunately, by the way, I almost didn't manage to come to Canada this time because the Canadian changed their rules. Me, as a holder of a green card in the United States, it's not valid anymore just to travel in. I had to apply online for some sort of not permanent, but some sort of a temporary visa. And I had to do it online, and they told me, you go on your cell phone and you just apply for it, and it takes only 10 minutes. I said, I have no cell phone. I do not want to have a cell phone, but I had a computer, but it didn't link up to the Wi-Fi. And by the way, a wonderful lady of Air Canada took me to the office and guided me through the system. And only because of that, I ended up in Canada last night. I do need a visa.
All right, let me take some questions right here.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I'll repeat them.
Okay.
Your film was excellent, and I also agree. I looked at Gorbachev as a man in the past, and that's where I relegated him to. So thank you for bringing him back and making him current again. My only question is, although you briefly kind of alluded to the state of the world today, did he ever tell you his frank opinion of the current president and the president?
So the question is, he alludes to the state of the world today. Did he ever elaborate or tell you more frankly what he thinks of current world leaders, including Putin?
I think they respect each other. They differ from each other in opinions, but certain very important things like the referendum at the Crimea, Gorbachev has said to me he finds it an enormous achievement of democracy, the will of the people, the overwhelming wishes and will of the people of the Crimea was expressed in a referendum that, by the way, was illegal, unconstitutional. The constitution of the Ukraine did not provide a referendum for secession. Yet, the referendum was held, and I think 97% or so of the population wanted to be back in their homeland. They never were really Ukraine, let's face it. And Gorbachev says, finally, a manifestation of the overwhelming wishes of the people. So in that respect, he's on the side of Vladimir Putin. I think there are some discrepancies. There's no doubt in my heart, but he didn't want to elaborate, and I personally wasn't that interested either. I know the state of affairs, And very important, and I said to him, Mikhail Sergeyevich, what is happening right now, some sort of a cautious return to Cold War is not productive. It shouldn't happen. And I do not think that the demonization of Russia is anything productive. The relationship between the West and Russia should be improved. We should listen to the security concerns. We should somehow look at your time where the impossible all of a sudden became possible. So I do believe that Russia could be a much more natural ally to the West than other superpowers. And in that respect, we had a very clear understanding about the very present situation.
If I may add to that, I
Put it to you.
I don't think they like each other. It certainly was my impression. I think Gorbachev was very cautious about being overtly negative about Putin as an individual, but he's still sort of brought out on state occasions, and I think Putin respects him enough not to want to interfere with him. But I don't think there's any warmth between the two men.
And I would like to add one thing. The respect of Putin vis-à-vis Gorbachev is so deep that Putin has made sure that there were some threats against Gorbachev. Putin made sure that Gorbachev got the most professional, toughest, and best security detail in all of Russia to protect him. And it was provided by Putin. So that should not be overlooked. He respects him, and I think in a way Gorbachev also respects him, and he differs from, they both differ in opinion quite significantly.
Okay, let me take a question right here. Jacket, yeah.
Yes. I liked seeing the family life of Gorbachev, both when he was a child and then his family, which you covered in the film. Could you comment? Do you think that a very healthy, robust, intimate family life makes a politician so much better? I was wondering.
So there's a lot about Gorbachev's family life, and the gentleman asked if you think that a robust family life makes for a better politician.
Not necessarily, because we have seen politicians that were torn apart and haunted and unhappy, and they made great politics. So it's not really a signifier. And besides, the family life of Gorbachev it was very, very intense and close with Raisa. But for example, his daughter, who lives in Berlin, and the granddaughters who live in Berlin, never showed up during his illness in the last year or two. So I found this very painful to see that. I cannot make a judgment because I do not know how often they speak on the phone, but I had the feeling, yes, it was with his wife Raisa. That was unique and special, and he was blessed with a woman that was of that caliber and had such a support for him and such a deep understanding for him.
I mean, he didn't express it himself, but it's basically accepted that Raisa was the strong container of the family, and when she died, like he said in the film, his life went as well, and I think the family structure crumbled quite fast after that, very sadly.
All right, two men questions. How about a woman where's a woman's hands up? Yep, right there in the middle. She described that Gorbachev's intention was to keep the Soviet Union together, and she wonders what lessons today's world leaders might learn from his efforts to try to have kept that coalition together. I assume you mean Brexit.
Well, and when you bring great change to the institution, he wanted the institution to stay while
He wanted to change an institution while not necessarily demolishing an institution.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to know because we have no experience of what would have happened had he managed to keep the republics together in one particular group. But he was quite passionate about that. And, you know, people in Russia tend to say he was the one that destroyed the Soviet Union. And yet, ironically, he was the one that really didn't want to. It was Yeltsin and the different heads of the different republics that saw their opportunity for independence and sort of basically seized the opportunity. What would have happened otherwise, I couldn't speculate.
And there's also one thing which is always somehow misrepresented in the West by the narrative of the West, and I'm speaking of Putin, who famously said that the demise of the Soviet Union was a very, very big tragedy. And the Western media immediately conclude, he dreams of the empire back. No, he does not, because you have to listen to the second half of his sentence, of Putin's sentence. It was a great tragedy because 15 million Russians overnight found themselves outside of their own country, meaning all of a sudden, let's say Americans would find themselves caught in political dissolution, and they would be Canadians or be Jamaicans or Cubans or Mexicans or Icelandic.
A lot of Americans are ready to embrace that.
No, I think you are misled. But anyway, I hear what you are saying. So, and it was not only 15 million Russians who suddenly were outside of their country and citizens of foreign countries. It was another 50 million of people in the Soviet Union, like, let's say, millions of Kazakhs who found themselves in Uzbekistan or Moldavia and all of a sudden were Uzbeks or Estonian citizens and couldn't return. So, yes, of course, something like the dissolution of an empire of that size had huge repercussions. And it should not be belittled that there was something very, very big going on and very disadvantageous for many human beings.
Okay, let's take one more question right here.
Thank you again. What preparation did you do for each of the conversations?
So the question is, what preparation did you do for these interviews before each conversation?
Not much. I just walked in and, to be straight, no, I read his books, his biography. I read a very, very fine, very voluminous biography by William Taubman that was published last September. Very, very good. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner for his biography on Khrushchev. And following Taubman's biography, I looked into transcript of the Supreme Soviet, of their secret sessions, because there are even two different ways of reporting it, the official one and then some private ones also doing parallel protocols, and they differ. And the difference in the protocols are very, very fascinating. And I would study that, and I would look back into the details of the German reunification, and I would reread my little diaries when I traveled on foot around my own country in order to hold it together. So, and I tried to extrapolate the Russian situation today vis-à-vis the situation at Gorbachev's time and the perspectives for the future. So I did a lot of reading and a lot of just free thinking. What would happen if this or that would be the case? What would happen if all of a sudden something like Gorbachev and Reagan. The most improbable of two characters meet and they click. And I had, when you say many Americans would like to go to Iceland and to Canada, I had the feeling when Trump went to Singapore to meet Kim Jong-un, that was an extraordinary sort of step, unexpected. And of course, nothing happened. No treaties were signed. But I do believe and I hope that both of them looked beyond the horizon. And I hope and I believe something like reduction of arms in a very dangerous situation is going to follow. That's my hope. So I constantly try to see Soviet Union, the demise of Soviet Union, today's situation, and of course it's a precarious situation. You have an unusual president in the United States, and you have a fairly unusual president in Russia as well. So let's see and let's keep our fingers crossed. We belong together. We belong together more than we are belonging to other major powers.
Werner, I do have one more question for you because we talked about it backstage. I'd asked you, how did you find the slugs drinking beer clip? And you had an extraordinary answer for me.
Well, I lived in Austria at that time. And I remember vividly that I saw it. It was at 9 p.m. or so, the main evening news. And I was reading, and I see this, and I was electrified, and I said to myself, do I see right? Do I see right? An entire epoch of almost an entire century comes to an end, lifting of the Iron Curtain. And now they speak of attracting slugs with beer because they love beer. And I thought, has the world become mad? Is this in absolute straightforward insanity? And I remembered it so vividly that I said to André, find it. And André and some very good people in archival research found it, and we found, for example, I knew about the microphone being open and Gorbachev fumbling the award ceremony for Gorbachev. What was it you did over there? What was it? And Gorbachev volunteers and says, the canal. So I have that from William Taubman's biography, and I said, find it. He must have seen it. We must see it in this film.
André, you can back up this story. He told you about the beer and...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I always said we need that more than other historical details and historical meetings. The slugs show we must.
Tomorrow morning, if you're a TIFF badge holder, Werner and I will be doing a conversation on stage at the Glenn Gould as part of the Industry Doc Conference. We are very grateful to have you both here for this film. Thank you for meeting Gorbachev. Yeah. André Singer and Werner Herzog.
Thank you. Thank you.